Okay. Okay. So yesterday in the synagogues around the world, we read the Torah portion about the giving of the Torah. So we've been starting from the whole Passover, the Passover events, going through the sea, and finally we get the Torah. It's all one continuum. And after we got the Torah, it makes sense. This week's Torah portion is an assortment of different ordinances, most of them not religious per se, ritual per se, but more what we would call civil or something like that. So just give me one moment here. I'll go back to that in a second. Okay, just want to make sure background. Okay, so this week's Torah portion, the overview, is following the revelation at Mount Sinai, God legislates a series of laws for the people of Israel, which makes perfect sense. You just got the Torah, now we got to get into the details. These include the laws of the indentured servant, the penalties for murder, kidnapping, assault, and theft, civil laws pertaining to redress of damages, granting of loans, and the responsibility of four guardians. Means, I think that would be more guardians, means like bailees, and someone who's just watching something for someone, and the rules concerning the conduct of courts of law and administering justice. Also included are laws warning against mistreatment of foreigners, observance of the seasonal festivals, agricultural gifts that are brought to Holy Temple in Jerusalem, prohibition against cooking meat with milk, the mitzvah of prayer. Altogether, the Torah portion of Mishpatim contains 53 separate mitzvahs, 23 positive commandments, and 30 prohibitions. God promises to bring the people of Israel to the Holy Land and warns them against assuming the pagan ways of its current inhabitants. The people of Israel proclaim, "We will do and we will hear all that God commands us," leaving Aaron and Hur in charge in the Israelite camp. Aaron is his brother, Hur is his nephew. Moses ascends Mount Sinai, remains there for 40 days and 40 nights, receive the Torah from God. Okay, so the bulk, the large bulk of the Torah portion is about these assortment of mitzvahs. We're not talking about that today. We're going to talk about the end of the Torah portion, where the Torah portion goes back to the Sinai experience. The way the Torah is laid out, what we read yesterday, this week, and going forward, seems very disjointed. And as we're going to discuss, we can assume, even though the Torah is not a history book, it's safe to assume that when the Torah lays out things in an order, there's before and after. And if the Torah says in one Torah portion, God spoke to Moses saying this, and then 4 Torah portions later says God spoke to Moses saying that, the assumption is that what is recorded earlier happened earlier. It's a reasonable assumption. And it's a Torah, it's the assumption that we carry for thousands of years. At the same time, Torah is not a history book, and Torah is not firmly wedded to chronology. Sometimes the Torah will put things out in a way which is more a cohesive thematic sequence more than a chronological sequence. So chronology is not an absolute in Torah. Fair enough. Now, but you always have to have a reason, because we're going to read a lot today, but because we want to read from the Torah portion we read yesterday and this one and this coming one. But in yesterday's Torah portion, you have the Jews have come out of Egypt. They're on the way to Sinai. Then it says in the first day of the 3rd month of the year, coming from Passover, which is the month in Hebrew we call it Sivan, so June time. The Jews, or the sons, or the children of Israel, arrived at the Sinai desert, and they're preparing to receive the Torah. They come up on day 1. They arrive on day 1. They're going to get the Torah on day 6, the 6th of the month. So they have 6 days of preparation. And we're going to read that there were different preparations they went through. The Torah doesn't say this happened on the 2nd day of the month, the 3rd day, the 4th day of the month, but obviously there was a small window. 1st day of the month, 6th day of the month, and it all happened there. Then they get to Torah. Everything's good. This week, we get a bunch of a smattering of mitzvahs. There's nothing to question. At the end of this week's Torah portion, the Torah throws in details of what happened in the days leading up to the giving of the Torah. It's like Appendix A. Oops, this is an outtake. We forgot to put this in, but we're not going to revise that first one. Stick this in somewhere. I mean, that's the way it feels. Like, where did that come from? And then next week, in the following 2 weeks, there's going to be the God's command to create the tabernacle in the desert, which was pursuant to Sinai, and then it's going to throw in the story of the golden calf, which happened before the tabernacle. So in these weeks, there's a lot of like, whoa, where does chronology fit in at all, and why not? What's the Torah? What message is the Torah telling us? What thematic tracks, at least, is the Torah going down? Because it's just plain old confusing. Okay, so now let's get into the texts. Text 1a, and it's a bit lengthy, but I'll go through it quickly. It's yesterday's Torah reading, part of yesterday's Torah reading. And as I mentioned, this is as everything makes sense. The screenplay is totally cohesive. They came the week before. They come through the split sea of reeds. Now they are coming to Sinai. The third month of the children of Israel's departure from Egypt. On this day, they arrived. Oops, sorry, I forgot that. Oops. And the third month of the children of Israel's departure from Egypt, on this day, they arrived in the desert of Sinai. They journeyed from a place called Rephidim. They arrived in the desert of Sinai, and they camped in the desert, and Israel encamped there opposite the mountain. Okay, they're getting ready to receive the Torah. They know they're receiving the Torah. They're in the Sinai desert. They see Mount Sinai. Moses ascends to God up the mountain, and God called him from the mountain, saying, "So shall you say to the house of Jacob and tell the sons of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and I brought you to me. Now, if you obey me and keep my covenant, you shall be to me a treasure out of all peoples, for mine is the entire earth. And shall be to me a kingdom of princes and a holy nation." These are the words you shall speak to the children of Israel. Moses came and summoned the elders of Israel and placed before them all these words that the God had commanded. Now, again, we don't know exactly which day. We actually do know, but it doesn't say from the Torah which of these days. This was actually day number 2 is when Moses, in other words, the second day of this third month, the second day of what we know as today as Sivan. That's when Moses gave them these words. But the Torah doesn't say it explicitly. All the people, Moses came and summoned all the elders of Israel and placed before them all these words that God had commanded him. All the people had replied in unison and said, "All that God has spoken we shall do." And God took the words of the people back to God. God said to Moses, verse 9, "Behold, I am coming to you in the thickness of the cloud, in order that the people hear when I speak to you, and they will also believe in you forever." And Moses relayed the words of the people to God. God said to Moses, "Go to the people and prepare them today and tomorrow, and they shall wash their garments. And they shall be prepared for the third day. From the third day, God will descend before the eyes of all the people upon Mount Sinai." So this is on the 4th day of the month. He says, "Prepare yourselves." 4, 5, 6. 6th day of Sivan is when God gave us the Torah. That's what today, the holiday of Shavuos. "And you shall set boundaries for the people around, saying, beware of ascending the mountain or touching its edge. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death." This is in the days, again, those within those 6 days leading up to Sinai. "No hand shall touch it, nor shall it be stoned or cast down. Whether man or beast it shall not live. When the ram's horn sounds a long drawn out blast, they may ascend the mountain." So Moses descended from the mountain to the people, and he prepared the people, and they washed their garments. He said to the people, "Be ready for 3 days, and not go near a woman." Talk to the men that there shouldn't be sexual relations in order to prepare themselves more to be in a more spiritual and less self-absorbed psychological place. Came to pass on the 3rd day, when it was morning, that there were thunderclaps and lightning flashes, and a thick cloud was upon the mountain, and a very powerful blast of a shofar, and the entire nation that was in the camp shuddered. God descended upon Mount Sinai to the peak of the mountain, and God summoned Moses to the peak of the mountain, and Moses ascended. Okay, so We have a bunch of things that are happening within this window of 6 days. Now, I don't think there's anything curious there. Now, we have what happens after. There's the Ten Commandments. It leads up to the Ten Commandments. What's that? God spoke all these words to respond. I am God, your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. All the people saw the voices and the torches and the sound of the shofar, the smoking mountain. The people saw and trembled, so they stood from afar. People remained far off, but Moses drew near to the opaque darkness where God was. God said to Moses, so shall you say to the children of Israel, you have seen that from the heavens I have spoken with you. Verse 20, shall not make me images of anything that is with me, gods of silver or gods of gold, you shall not make for yourselves. An altar of earth you shall make for me, and you shall slaughter it beside your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your cattle. Wherever I allow my name to be mentioned, I will come to you and bless you. Okay, so that is 2 things that we read yesterday. This coming week, as I said, there's going to be, most of the Torah portions all are going to be about all these different laws, 50-something different laws that we're going to, and then at the end, all of a sudden, like a non sequitur, this appears. And Moses, and to Moses, God said, come up to God, you and Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and prostrate yourselves from afar. And Moses alone shall approach God, but they shall not approach, and the people shall not ascend with him. So Moses came and told the people all the words of God and all the ordinances, and all the people answered in unison, said, all the word God has spoken we will do. This was quoted already earlier. This is on the 4th day, the 5th day of the month. Moses wrote all the words of God, and he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and 12 monuments for the 12 tribes of people, the words of God that God had spoken up until Sinai. And he sent the youths of the children of Israel, and they offered up burnt offerings, and they slaughtered peace offering to God, bulls. And Moses took half the blood, verse 6, and put it into the basins, and half the blood he cast onto the altar. Blood is a sign of a covenant, and our passion, our life force. And he took the book of the covenant. It's a book, we don't have it as a distinct book, but it was, Moses wrote down whatever he had within the history from creation through Sinai up until those points. This is before the Torah was given. And read it within the hearing of the people. And they said, all that God spoke, we will do and we will hear. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people, and said, behold the blood of the covenant that God has formed with you concerning these words. So the focus in this piece is about the covenant that took place before Sinai, the blood covenant. And Moses and Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel ascended, and they perceived the God of Israel. And here there's this metaphor, and beneath his feet was like the forming of a sapphire brick, and like the appearance of the heavens for clarity. And upon the nobles of the children of Israel, God, he did not lay his hand. And a second. So what we have here? 11. Yeah, and they perceived God, and they ate and drank. And God said to Moses, come up to me to the mountain and remain there. I will give you the stone tablets, the law and the commandment, which I have written to instruct them. Right? Now, I'm going to give you the 10 commandments. Stone tablets. This is pre-tablets, pre-giving of the Torah. So Moses and Joshua, it's clearly that. So Moses and Joshua, his servant, arose, and Moses ascended to the mount of God. And to the elders, he said, wait for us here until we return to you, and here Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a case, let him go to them. Meanwhile, I'm leaving, so who's going to take care of propriety and discipline and decisions within the camp? My brother and my nephew are here. Moses went up to the nephew in the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. And Moses came within the cloud, and he went up to the mountain, and Moses was upon the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. And then the next week we get into the tabernacle, and then the golden calf. So what we read here is clearly happened chronologically. Yeah, this past week. Thematically, the only thing we can see over here is that there's more of a focus on the covenant with God. and less on the nuts and bolts of getting the law. But the story is disjointed. Where is it taking us? So, and here they have a graphic here they gave us. They're calling it Sinai narrative number 1, Sinai narrative number 2. What we read yesterday is chapter 19 and 20. And then this is the what's 21 to 23, which is this coming week. And then at the end, in 24, which is this coming week, we have again a Sinai narrative. So there's narrative 1, narrative 2. Then what we haven't really touched, what they call Truma and Tetzava, which are the following 2 weeks, which have instructions for the construction of the tabernacle, the design of the tabernacle's vessels, and the design of the garments to be worn by the priests in the tabernacle. The week after these Truma and Tetzava, those 2 Torah portions, is the aftermath of the giving of the Torah. Moses descended from the mountain, seeing the golden calf, Moses shattering the tablets, Moses receiving the second set of tablets. So this is all over the ballpark when you're talking about timeline. And if we take a look, the Talmud tells us, as a rule that we have to understand, Rabbi Menashe bar Tachlifa said in the name of Rav, there is no chronological order earlier and later in the Torah. Now, what it's important, in the way they translated it, would have done it a little differently. It's not that there's no chronological order. We can assume chronology if there's before and after. That's logical. It isn't a firm rule that it has to be chronological. There has to be a reason that something is put before or later. And if it's not because of chronology, then why would we do that? We stick with chronology, and you can assume chronological flow unless there's a reason not to. So Rabbi Menashe bar Tachlifa is not saying that it doesn't exist. It exists because logic exists. Why would you put something first and not later if it doesn't follow first and later chronology? But it's not a fast and concrete rule. Nachmanides, one of the greats in the Middle Ages, speaks about another great from the Middle Ages named Rabbi Avram Even Ezra. They're both Spanish greats. He has a bit of a criticism about Avram Even Ezra. He said Avram Even Ezra invokes the principle there's no chronological order of later in the Torah very often at will. He says you can't go crazy with that. Of course there's a before and after. It doesn't have to be, but you have to explain why. In my opinion, he takes a hard line in the other direction. The entire Torah follows chronological order, aside from when the Torah makes the departure explicit. And any such departure must have a good reason. He said, the Torah student has every right to assume chronological order. And if you can, the Torah is going to let you know. And there's a good reason for it. So to take what I think is a balanced approach to this, there are definitely departures from the chronological order. Sometimes we're not going to see that the Torah is giving us that signal. We should look for those signals. And the signals are not just that there's a departure, but there's a reason for the departure. So here, looking at this, the Torah student says, this clearly is not chronological. Why would the Torah not just put all the story of Sinai together? Then you have the case, the episode of the golden calf, and then you tell us about the tabernacle, because that's the way it happened. What's the point of jumbling everything up? So here's something up. It says Rashi, who we didn't get into Rashi here because I think it's going to be smoother without going into the Rashi itself. Rashi was another. We mentioned Nachmanides. We mentioned Rabbi Even Ezra. Rashi is also one of those greats, right, from the same period of time, roughly speaking, in France. Rashi cites the rule the Talmudic rule that there's no chronological order of earlier and later in the Torah a number of times. However, it is clear that this principle can only be invoked when there's no alternative explanation and there must be a reason for its departure. When you're forced into it, you're forced into it. So we don't go willy-nilly to that. In our case, we need to explain what we read in this week's Torah portion. We brought it up. The section beginning, and to Moses God said, come up the mountain, which was said to Moses on the 4th day of Sivan. Remember, they came to the mountain on the 1st day of Sivan. They got the Torah on the 6th day of Sivan. Torah says that 3 days in advance, in other words, you come up, and then on the 3rd day from when you come up, you're going to get the Torah, which is the 4th, 5th, 6th. So God tells Moses, tell the people to start preparing themselves for the Torah. You come up the mountain. That's the 4th day of Sivan. And other things happen the next day, which is the 5th. Why then does it appear only at the end of Parshat Mishpatim out of its place? We can't just say, oh, it doesn't make a difference. There's no order. Of course there's order. It may not be chronological order, but there's got to be an order to this. Why is this so disjointed, deliberately? So here's the Rebbe's general attitude to it, which we're going to unpack. It says, in the giving of the Torah, the events, there's one set of events, but 2 stories being told. One is the story of the Jews being given a program for posterity, a program for life, a program to bring meaning to their lives, to bring meaning to the world. That's giving of the Torah. That's story number 1. Another story that is being told here is that this was a time when God forged an intimate relationship with us. It's not the same thing as laws. In any important relationship, there are going to be parameters. There are going to be expectations. There are going to be rules. The rules are not the relationship, but they're there to protect the relationship. And when if the rules are broken, God forbid, it reflects on the relationship. That's just the way we operate as humans. So we need parameters, but parameters don't make the relationship. They help protect the relationship. They define parameters to keep the relationship sacred, but the relationship is an emotional or psycho-spiritual connection. So in the giving of the Torah, as the Rebbe is reading it, he says the Torah is clearly showing us there are 2 separate tracks that we have to be aware of. One is that God said, you are my people, you're the children of Abraham and Sarah, you've suffered for hundreds of years, I'm taking you out because I love you, I care about you, and we're going to create an open relationship between us of love at Mount Sinai. As part of that, secondary to that, or as part B of that, I'm going to give you rules, because relationships need rules, but they're 2 separate tracks. In other words, separate in the sense that they both deserve attention and be fleshed out without being all jumbled into one story, because then we can only see it as one element of the story eclipsing the other. So in the Rebbe's words, in text 7, the giving of the Torah achieved 2 objectives. Firstly, God gave the Jewish people the commandments and laws of the Torah. Second, that's the way the Torah puts it up, because it's a rule book. It's a book that tells the Torah at the end of the day is a book. It's an instruction manual. It's telling us how to live our lives. So the first theme presented in the Torah is that we went to Sinai, we came out of Egypt, that we're subservient to God, and here's what we got to do. Second, but no less important, through receiving the Torah, the Jewish people became God's servants, as the verse states, you'll serve God on this mountain. It was a relationship. Oh, one second. I'm sorry. Did I mess that up? No, so we got. Okay, 8. I'm sorry. The account in the Torah portion of Yithro focuses primarily on the giving of the Torah and its commandments, the 10 Commandments. Therefore, the account of the preparations for the giving of the Torah focuses on the commandments given to prepare the Jews for for this event. They have to abstain from sexual relations. They have to keep a distance from the mountain. There are things that they're told to do, rules for preparing for the event that's going to give them more rules. That's a message than what we read yesterday. In this week's Torah portion, at the end, a focus is put not on rules, on covenant. A covenant is a super rational connection. By contrast, the account in the Torah portion of Mishpatim focuses on the second aspect of the giving of the Torah, the covenant between God and the Jewish people, through which the Jews became God's servants. Now, servants is not an intimate relationship, but the idea is, so we would frame it more spousal or parent-child, but one of the things here is that we care so much about God that we're willing to surrender to God. Why are we willing to surrender to God? Why are you willing to fall in love? Because there's this great trust and connection with God. So servants is a word that really, in the English, the baggage with it, it doesn't intimate an intimate or romantic type of relationship, or a deep bond like a parent-child, but that's what's being brought across here. The servant part means that we are surrendering to God willingly because we trust God and we feel loved by God. The covenant was forged, it was our choice. The covenant was forged through the series of actions described in this account. The people's accepting the Torah by saying we will do and we will hear. It's the people saying, we are committing to God. We'll find out the details later, which isn't very smart. You don't walk into a business deal and say, I'm in, then tell me what I just committed to. When you love someone, when you trust someone, you're willing to fall into their arms and say, you need something, I'm with you, and tell me how I can help. So the experience at Sinai, and that's one of the things we read this week, was this idea which resonates. It's one of the more famous quotes, or most famous quotes in the Torah. It's the Jewish people saying to God before they got the Torah, we're going to do what you say, and we'll study about it later. Why would they do it? Not because they were, a kind of stunted slaves that were just going along. They felt an embrace from God. They watched God for a year extricate them from the terrible situation in Egypt, and they felt for 7 weeks in the desert, they felt this closeness to God, and they were working on themselves and perceiving. And there in the desert, it wasn't like we have over here, because you wake up in the morning, you can see the snow and the rain and a squirrel, but you don't see God. They saw godliness in the desert. They knew exactly who was taking care of them. So by the time they got to Sinai, there was this connection, and they were ready for what we call the covenant. A covenant is, as I said before, it's a super rational relationship. It's like having a friendship with someone where it's really unbreakable, and that we know no matter, even if something arises between us, we're going to work it out because we're so close. So the covenant was forged through the series of actions described in this account. The people's accepting the Torah by saying we will do and we will hear, writing what was called the Book of the Covenant, and the construction of an altar, offerings, and sprinkling blood. And as I said, blood is as we have in the blood of the circumcision, the blood is our life force. The blood shows our passion, and therefore that's a symbol of a deep relationship. So you think about it this way, then. God, the Torah says like this: God brought the Jews to Sinai. Part A of that was at Sinai, God gave them a comprehensive rule book for life. Said, now I'm going to help you live meaningful lives in a world that would be a jungle, if left to its own devices. That was the story we read just. Pursuant to that, we're going to read this next week. Bunch of laws. That all makes sense. Now, then the Torah backtracks. Says, now I want to talk to you about a different element of that. It's about the relationship. So first of all, when the Jews were there, not only did they have rules to prepare for getting more rules, they were talking about they love God and they're surrendering to God and they're making these blood offerings, and it's all about this idea of covenant. So covenant's about relationship. What else is about relationship? What else is about relationship is what we call the tabernacle. The tabernacle was a structure that existed in the desert, but what it was it was a physical structure, but it symbolized how we can make our physical lives a home for godliness, that we can experience a closeness with God even in the physical world. So when God tells them, and this will be in 2 weeks, when God tells the Jews, create for me a tabernacle, he says, the verse doesn't say, and I will dwell within it. It says, I will dwell within them. That through the exercise of the tabernacle and the model of the tabernacle, we can see how to make our own lives into a tabernacle for God. The Torah model is that our homes can be a home for God. It can be the kitchen and the bedroom and all the comforts of home. No one's saying not. But with an attitude that we want to lead a meaningful life and find meaning in our relationships, in how we sleep, in how we eat, in the walls of our home. Each home is supposed to be made into a tabernacle. That's the message of the tabernacle. There is a communal tabernacle, which we all need. But the idea of saying, my house is my house, but I go to synagogue, to tabernacle, that's not the Torah way of looking at it. The Torah way of looking at it is I go to the tabernacle so I get the strength and perspective so I can make my own home into a sanctuary, my own bedroom, my own office is a sanctuary for God. Because what's the sanctuary for God? Doesn't mean I'm sitting there in meditation or whatever. I'm doing my work, but I have a meaningful perspective on life. I'm thinking about what does God want out of this? Out of my business or out of whatever I'm doing in my room or in my office. So the flow from the end of this week's Torah portion, which talks about the covenant with God, the flow into the next 2 Torah portions, which is about the tabernacle, that's perfect. It's all about the relationship with God. It's all about us saying, we want to take our human lives, open them up, see a little bit past ourselves and say, God, I know I'm here for a reason. I want that to permeate me. And I want to lead life with purpose. And here we bring a medrash, text 9. Rabbi Yeshua said, God told the Jewish people, while they were still in Egypt, that their redemption was conditioned on their construction of a sanctuary for him. So the Jews were in Egypt. This idea, the Jews knew they were coming out, that they were going to, God had told Moses, scripturally, you see, God told Moses, they're going to be freed of servants, and they're going to come to Mount Sinai and get the Torah. That's what we know. This Rabbi Yeshua says it wasn't only about them getting the Torah. They knew that the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow was not just the Torah, it was the idea of creating a sanctuary. The whole redemption, the liberation of Passover was going to bring us to making a physical sanctuary for God, for the community and for ourselves, in our own homes, in which he could rest his presence in the midst of the people. This is the meaning of the verse. They will know that I, the Lord, am their God, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, in order that I may dwell in their midst. That's one of the verses. When he took the Jews, when God tells Moses that he told the Jews that I'm taking them out of Egypt, he said, I'm taking them out of Egypt because I want to be in their lives. I want their lives to be a sanctuary for me. That was the goal. It wasn't just to free slaves. We needed freedom from the oppression, but he wanted to free us from meaninglessness. When the tabernacle was erected, the divine presence descended and rested in our midst. Rav, another great rabbi of the Talmud, says, when the tabernacle was built, something unprecedented in the history of the world occurred. From the time of creation until that day, God's presence hadn't rested in the lower realms of the world. This began only after the tabernacle was built. The idea of the tabernacle was to say that God is not for there. It's not render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, and that we have separate things. I got my life, and then I visit God once in a while. I call God into my life. If I have my life hopefully is aligned with something purposeful, no matter what I'm doing. And of course, I'm taking care of myself, all those things, because I have to take care of myself. But it's in the big picture, I'm alive for a purpose, and somehow the world is going to benefit from my existence. And that's what the idea of the tabernacle is. So, as this Medrash is laying out, the flow coming out of Egypt was on two tracks. You're going to come out of Egypt, go to Sinai, and get rules for a meaningful life. You're going to come out of Egypt, and you're going to find a close relationship with God so that you can experience a meaningful life. Not just the rules, but the relationship. So let's go to key points, and we'll review this a little. Let me just put this over here. Okay. First, the Torah's narrative of what we call Matan Torah, which means the giving of the Torah, is scattered, non-linear, raising questions about its structure. Just looking at on the surface, it's all over the ballpark. You think this is who's the editor here? But when we look and we say it doesn't have to be in chronological order because it's trying to lay out two themes, that's the order. It's a thematic order, not a chronological order. So we see two narratives. Narrative one focuses on God delivering instructions and commandments as a manual for life, including preparations for the revelation, the Ten Commandments, and several religious laws. You can read that with a legalistic lens, a rules lens, and it makes perfect sense. And it flows. But there's a narrative two that we pick up as soon as we laid out narrative one, focused on the rules. Narrative two starts, which is the end of this week's Torah portion, which highlights the relational aspect, emphasizing the Jewish people's acceptance of the covenant, including Moshe's ascent, the offerings, and the blood sprinkling ceremony to symbolize the bond. Torah number 4, the Torah separates these narratives to distinguish the distinct messages, law giving versus relationship. And number 5, both aspects are essential. Judaism is both a set of laws and a profound personal relationship with God, and we are encouraged to integrate both into our lives. So I'm going to stop the share here. So if there are any questions, we can.
Okay.
Yes.
Going back to page 63, Rashi's rules.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2 says Rashi only quotes from the verse that directly contributes to his explanation. Now, it seems to me that he's saying, well, if it doesn't agree with me, I don't want to deal with it.
No. Well, I haven't brought that up because that would really only help to me if we're really looking at Rashi. Rashi was a very precise person. So the way Rashi works, whether in the scripture, in the Talmud, or anything he's doing, is he clips, so to speak. He cuts and pastes from those days. He says, these words I want to explain. He doesn't clip any words that he's not explaining. He's not just taking a phrase. He's precise in which words he is copying and pasting, to use our term. In looking at the Rashi, which I didn't get into today, because I think it would be distracting. One of the things that the Rebbe, in analyzing Rashi, was always not only about what he said, but which words did he copy and paste, because that's also instructive. And really, for that, you also have to look into, and the Rebbe would also, you have to look into the make sure old copies of Rashi manuscripts, because that's like, who cares what the title was? But it really matters. and sometimes you can have the copying just put an extra word. But that wasn't relevant to this, and doesn't mean to disregard. It means that if we were studying the Rashi, that would be an added layer of understanding. I went to the heart of what it is, which is that the Torah lays out two things which we have to know for ourselves. To lead a life which checks off all the boxes of our ritual obligations is good, but it's only one track. The other track is about the emotion, the feeling. To lead a life where we feel close to God and we trust God and we believe in God, that's beautiful, that's gold. But if we believe and we trust God, then we should also realize that there's the relationship asks something of us. It's not just about feeling, it's about doing. And both those tracks are laid out here. And the reason that the Torah can project that the reason that the Torah gave us such a disjointed seeming jumble of events, and when it's going to throw off your average 5-year-old and or 50-year-old, is because the Torah wanted to drive home to us. Those are two tracks we have to honor both. We honor what we need to do, but we have to honor how we feel, who we do, and try to look for a closeness with God, because it's attainable. I mentioned that I just found out right before the class that I don't know if any of you know Evelyn Kornick, but she just passed away. So I'm going to have to leave, and God willing, see you next week. Some better news.
If the creeks don't rise.